Coordinating shipping and parts delivery between Europe and the United States is a tricky thing, it turns out. While in part 1, which you guys can catch up here, I talked a little bit about how the Heatkiller 4 CPU water block was confirmed to be on the way. It actually took a good bit of time before it arrived, and then an even gooder bit of time before the actual mounting hardware showed up as well. You guys have been asking me for an update on the Dark Crystal project in the comments of basically every video I've done since then. But the truth of the matter is that in the interim, I had some other priority projects come through, and I had to address those before turning my attention back to our Purple Beast. With everything, well, almost everything, we'll get to that in a second, in my office now, we can soldier on to part 2, which starts here. So we left off last time with the blocks mounted to the GPUs, the motherboard installed to the case, and the radiators and fans mocked up to get an idea of spacing. After the CPU block and hardware arrived, I went ahead and tossed that onto the 6900K. Our purple cables from Senpai Studios also came in the mail between last video and this one, and as always, Joe did an amazing job with the purple and white theme. He even tossed in a little extra spice with the purple and gray digicamo highlights, which I think will do a great job of bridging the color divide. One thing that I'm usually very aggressive with is making sure that all of my cables that will be difficult to access are installed and routed prior to any tubing runs being started. This allows me some freedom to work inside the case without the radiators and fans getting in the way. For this build, I'm going to be using a couple of sleeved PWM fan splitters running off of the top headers, so that we don't have to route any fan cables along the bottom or the right edge of the board. This whole area will be covered up anyway once the water cooling components are installed, so the fact that we have a little bit of yellow sticking out there is really not a problem. You can see how the modifications I made to the 570X's PSU shroud are coming in handy here, as we could barely see the front panel connector cables at all. Next, we jumped back into the radiator game and installed both the top 240 and the front 360 with all of their fans. For the 240 and for the case exhaust, we're going with Corsair's HD 120 RGB fans, which will also serve as our primary case illumination, since they do get very bright. On the 360, we're going to go with the Corsair SP 120 RGB fans that came with the 570X. With the reservoir firmly mounted to the front rad, it was time to get to work on the rest. Now, Joe actually hates when I install this kind of cabling before all the tubing runs and leak testing is done. The reason is that I requested cables made out of paracord, which is a synthetic nylon cloth, and paracord can stain pretty easily. The problem in this build is that once all the tubing is in, there's no way I'll be able to cram my hand back there and pull the cables through the grommets, let alone plug them in correctly and make them look pretty. So for now, the cables are routed but not plugged into anything, as the PSU won't be installed until later on. At this point, I started on the tubing runs, and for that, I'm going to toss it over to, well, to me. I was working on this the other night, and this is how things went.
Alright, well, if you guys have ever done any kind of custom water cooling, modding, or anything along those lines, with any kind of regularity, you will inevitably, at some point, have gotten to this portion of your build where you start off your loop, you put in your inlet and your outlet of your reservoir, you start planning out the way you want to run everything else, and then you realize you don't have enough fittings. Specific fittings like 90s or 45s or extensions or things like that. So I actually reached this point, and I now have to order next day from Performance PCs some more Bits Power matte white fittings, and we're going to continue this tomorrow, I guess. Alright, so we got our fittings in, and I've started to install them down here. I got some 90s and an extender back there on the bottom of the radiator. And as you guys can maybe tell from the way I have this configured, the way this is going to run is the rear outlet of the radiator is going to be connected up to here. It's going to just kind of run in a 90, I'm going to put a 90-degree bend in and come right up here. The other part of the radiator, let me actually zoom this out a little bit. The other outlet from the radiator is going to come up along this channel right here and then over. And then we're gonna figure out what to do with it over in this area, because we have our other radiator ports over here, and then we have our CPU block here, and then we're gonna run it down to the GPUs. So that's what I'm gonna be working on today. So this is actually a tool that I've come to use a lot. This is the Primo Chill Rigid Finishing Bit, or RFB. Not only is it useful for finishing off like rough edges when you make cuts in acrylic or PETG, but you could actually use it to make small adjustments to length just by shaving some off by running the bit a little bit longer, and you could shave off a couple millimeters if you need to make very small adjustments, whereas it's much harder to do that with a tool like this, which makes obviously full thickness cuts very easy, but at a cost of precision. So the rigid finishing bit actually comes in really handy when you're doing stuff like that, and it's going to be something that I'm going to use basically throughout this build. Alright, so we got this bottom portion finished here. We can see these two tubes are going to run up parallel next to each other. I think that'll make a pretty cool effect with the purple coolant. And this tube runs all the way up to the top. Hold on. It runs all the way up to the top here, and then it's going to go across and enter into the upper radiator. Alright, so what I just realized here is that the way I'm going to have this loop configured, usually what I do is one of the reasons that I use these tops with ports is so that I could use one of them as a fill. And the way I'm going to have this tubing configured here, this is going to come up and over, this is going to go over, so there's going to be two tubes that are running this way. It's going to be basically impossible to access the top of this reservoir for filling. I could try to use this as a fill, because you use one of these plugs, undo that, fill it there. But the problem is this is the out port, and as a result, what I would need to do is fill it, plug the hole back up, run it, unplug it, fill it, etc. It would become very, very difficult to fill it properly, get out all the air bubbles and whatnot, because I couldn't have it running with the fill port in there, because it would just pump out of that port instead of just staying in there, because this is the out. So what I'm going to have to do is put another one of these four-way junctions here. That actually will kind of make some nice symmetry at the bottom of the reservoir with the two valves, or sorry, with the two fittings that are the same. It means I'm going to have to redo this, but that's not a big deal in any way. What I think that also means is that while I'll be able to do the rest of the tubing today, this up here, and get this all done, I won't be able to fill it today. So I think as far as we're going to go today is to get the entire loop constructed, see how it looks, see if we're happy with it, go ahead and place the order for another one of these fittings, and when that comes in, that'll be part 3. That'll be filling the loop and doing some performance testing. So we've gone, I think, as far as we could go for today, because not only do I need this fitting, as it turns out, I probably need another fitting or two for this top corner to come down and meet with this fitting right here. But I think the rest of it came out really good. These tubes are running pretty parallel. These tubes are running pretty parallel. Everything's kind of going according to plan. And as long as I'm not an idiot, or maybe for some reason one of the O-rings is busted or something, this should be good to go as soon as I get in these other couple fittings, and then we should be ready to fill it and test it out.
So what do you guys think of how this build is going so far? I'm just about done with the layout, and once these couple of fittings arrive, it will just be a matter of swapping them in and starting on the leak testing. If all goes well there, I'll move on to installing the PSU and putting in a couple of hours probably to manage the crazy cable mess that's currently going on around back. Let me know down below in the comments if you might have approached this any differently. Do you guys like the decision to use 90-degree dual link fittings instead of bends? I was kind of on the fence actually, but I think it looks pretty stellar now. What kind of performance number do you think we can expect here, and how low will our temperatures be? Get subscribed to the channel so you don't miss the epic conclusion to Dark Crystal, and also so you don't miss my upcoming 10,000 subscriber giveaway. As always guys, thanks for watching.